So one of the best films of all times, Back to the Future, has this young guy called Marty who sits in an automotive that's a time traveling machine built by his crazy scientist friend. And he goes back into time from 1985 to 1955. And he comes across his future parents. And he accidentally prevents them from falling in love, thereby denying himself of his own existence down the road. And the whole movie from there on is hilarious. It's about him trying to get his future parents together, get them to get married, and then, of course, go back into the future. Now, that sounds very cool, actually. Imagine if you could actually do that. If you could actually sit in a car or a machine that would take you back in time, and imagine going back 100 years, meeting your grandparents, your great-grandparents. Wouldn't that be cool? Imagine being able to talk to them, to see what they're doing, to see what they think about, to see how they live, what kind of work they do. And even more fascinating if you had the opportunity to bring them back with you to current times. But then it makes you wonder, would they fit in? Would you be able to relate to them? Would they be able to relate to what's happening? How would that work? Now, it sounds like it wouldn't work. But guess what? In today's society, we have 5 generations that live together, work together. In the workplace, you see all of these 5 generations together. The oldest generation in the workplace today is a generation referred to as the silent generation, folks born between 1924 and 1944. Now, many of you in this room will say, geez, I don't know anyone that old, but think twice. President Joe Biden belongs to that generation. Come forward. The baby boomers, 1945 to 1965, none other than Prime Minister Modi. 1965 to 1980 is referred to as Generation X. That's the generation I represent. The king of Bollywood, Shah Rukh Khan, belongs to this generation. Come a bit forward, the generation referred to as the Millennials, most researched generation, 1985 to, let's say, 1980 to 1995. We all know Justin Bieber. And then the youngest generation in the workforce today, everybody knows Greta Thunberg. That's the generation that was born after 1995 until, let's say, 2010. Now, all these folks from different generations, you see them around you at the workplace today, and they get along well. And it makes you wonder, how is that working out? How do they get along so well? Because they've grown up in different times. They must think differently. But the one theme that connects them all together is the reason why they go to work. People go to work to provide for their families and to get a deeper sense of purpose in their lives. And that's really why they get along so well when they go to the office or when they go to the workplace or when they mingle in society as well. Now, just because people are born in a certain year doesn't mean that they'll all think alike. People's thinkings is influenced by various factors. It could be geopolitical factors, it could be politics, it could be social factors, it could be technology. But the biggest factor that influences people's thinking are events that happen in their formative years. A 12-year-old kid in Ukraine, for example, will be shaped very differently from an evolution perspective, from a thinking perspective today, versus a 12-year-old in New Delhi. So it's not good to label generations and stereotype people just because you're a Gen X, you're supposed to be this way. But by and large, there are common themes that are common across the world. For example, 50 years back, you couldn't talk about same-sex marriages. Today, it's not just okay to talk about it, but it's also legalized in many countries. So as societies evolve, more, I would say, job opportunities open up for people. Now think of your parents or your grandparents' generations. When they woke up in the morning, typically they got dressed, they packed up the lunch, or it was packed for them, and they went to the office, or they went to work, and they came back late evening. Today, most people don't even go to the office because they choose to work from home. They could work from anywhere. There's a new style of working today. Work is no longer a place you go to. Work is something you do. That's been the biggest change over the last so many years. Now, there are many jobs that are grandparents or great-grandparents did that probably don't exist today, but there are many that do exist still. So the roles like architects, engineers, doctors, chefs, singers, those roles still exist in the professional world today. But there are roles that would surprise you that existed but obviously don't exist today. On the screen, you see this lady. She was known as a switchboard operator. Her role was to connect people when they tried to call each other. So Sandeep could not call Kunal directly. Sandeep had to go through this lady who would connect Kunal with Sandeep. Did you know there was an actual person who went and lit street lamps every night, just like you burn a candle? That person was called a light lamper. Show of hands, how many of y'all have tried bowling before as a sport? Quite a few. Did you know in the olden days when you threw a ball, there was a little kid who would run, get the ball back for the bowler, and stack the pins back up for the next ball? It was called a pin setter. Similar to what we see in tennis, we have ball boys and ball girls. Those kind of roles obviously don't exist. Technology has replaced those roles. I found this topic very interesting, and I decided to do some research. I read a lot. I asked a lot of questions to a lot of people from different generations. I wanted to understand what events, if any, shaped every generation's thinking. And I started with the baby boomers. Remember that I said the folks born between 1946 to 1964. Now, a lot happened in the baby boomers' lifetimes. They saw the Vietnam War, they saw the civil rights movement, but the biggest event that shaped their lives, or their thinking, I should say, was the landing of the man on the moon. When Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin set their feet on the moon, they inspired the entire generation. And I kid you not when I say that the Apollo 11 aircraft or spacecraft that took them to the moon had less computing power than the iPhone you carry in your pocket today. This generation learned to deliver in spite of all odds. They didn't have many resources. They did not have many opportunities to learn, but they nevertheless somehow find a way to make it happen. They lived in joint families. They believed in teamwork. They had really strong core values they brought with them to society and to the workplace. Let's fast forward. Generation X, like I said, 1965 to 1980, the generation I represent. This generation, or my generation, was the first to ever play with a video game, believe it or not. This generation saw the birth of the internet. As a result of which, obviously, a whole new industry mushroomed. It's no surprise that Google and Amazon were founded by Generation Xers. Around that same time, India as a market was opening up. India liberalized, opened its doors to foreign countries, foreign companies. And as a result of both the events converging, we suddenly saw a lot of focus on software and computer design as a profession. Computer academies were set up all over. The companies like Infosys and Wipro were born around the same time. India started exporting software talent to other parts of the world. And those professionals then came back to India with ideas, with opportunities, and further multiplied the growth of this industry. Let's go to the next generation. We often read a lot about the millennials. Like I said, 1980 to 1995. This is the generation that saw the birth of social media and digital communication. This is the generation that realized that with social media, with apps, with telecommunication, with digitization of everything, you could change the world the way we lived. And they started disrupting business models. From the way you ordered pizzas to the way you ordered or booked a taxi, everything became digitized. This generation realized that if they didn't learn this new way of living and working, they would not be relevant anymore. So they all started taking interest in their own learning and development. And this generation is now known to be the most impatient generation because they really want to learn, and they get so restless that if they don't find the learning opportunity, they bail out, they do something else. This generation is 50% more likely to not just move cities, but to move countries as well, to look for something that provides them with a growth opportunity. This generation is 16% more likely to move and jump across industries just for the sake of learning. You see this generation going after jobs that are in industries that have digitized or are on a journey of digitization. They get attracted towards those kind of jobs. This generation also created new types of jobs. Who knew there was such a thing called influencer? Who knew there was such a thing called blogger? Who knew there was such a thing called app developer? All these became professions where people are making a lot of money, and more people are inspired to take on such roles. You move on to the next generation, the youngest generation in the workforce, Gen Z. Gen Z is born between, let's say, 1995 and 2010. Now, this generation was born probably after the birth of social media, after the birth of internet for sure. And they don't know anything other than that. That's the only way they know how to communicate for the most part. But there were a couple of events that happened in the early formative years of this generation that sort of were disturbing and have influenced this generation's thinking. The first is, of course, climate action. And the second is the COVID pandemic. Social media was bombarded by both these events. And this generation felt that the system, the governments had failed them. And in the process, they sort of took it upon themselves to solve the world's problems. They are very driven by a desire to make a difference. They want to make a social impact, and they will not think twice if they have to give it back to you to make their points heard. Any little discussion becomes a debate on social media today. This generation disrupted how work was done. After COVID pandemic, 80% of this generation, they went to the employers and they looked the employer in the eye and said, we're not going to come back to the office. We will only if you allow us to work in a hybrid model. We will only if you focus on sustainability. We will only if you focus on DEI. We will only if you focus on our well-being as well. They set conditions. And the employers, large companies that have been around for 200-300 years, they gave in. Such is the power of this new generation. Now, this generation is willing to do anything. They'll be singers, they'll be artists, they'll be anything, because they don't believe that they are working because they want to make a career out of what they're doing. They're working just so that they can be employed, so that they can get money, so that they can do what they really want to do, which is to make a difference. This generation started the concept of silent quitting, which means I'll do enough just to stay employed. I don't want to get fired. I'm not going to go over and above, not because I'm not sincere, not because I don't want to, because I want to have bandwidth in my life to focus on things that really matter. Such is the depth of this generation's thinking. Now let's look ahead. What's going to happen ahead? What kind of jobs will happen or come up? Now clearly, some jobs will go away. We've seen that. You know of companies like Blockbuster, for example. They would rent video cassettes or CDs. It's gone, replaced with Netflix. You've heard or you've seen memory flash drives. That's gone. That's history. You now have cloud computing. Likewise, many solutions today will go away. The problems may remain, but they'll be replaced with technologically driven solutions, which means that there will be an opportunity to create new types of roles. Now, we all talk about AI. That's a big buzzword. I think AI is going to be a game changer. There's a lot of debate. There are a lot of people who talk about doomsday scenarios when it comes to artificial intelligence. I personally hope or choose to believe that AI and humans will coexist, and they'll create something that's better for the society. But there could be a job title called AI ethicist, someone who ensures that we're not crossing lines and keeps us in check and becomes basically a role that companies go and hire. You could have a drone manager, similar to a car fleet manager in companies or similar to an air fleet manager in airlines, where a drone manager will look after the fleet, will look after the maintenance schedule, will do the pickup, drops, etc. You could have so many different roles. The future is limitless, and it's very exciting. Now, clearly, there's a lot of runway. We will keep growing. India has announced that we want to be a $10 trillion economy in the next, let's say, 10, 15 years. The world's going to keep growing. With population growth will come more opportunities. But what's important is that we have inclusive growth. We don't want to have somebody who's building nice buildings, offices, flyovers, dams, etc., for all of us in the daytime, who then goes and sleeps in a shanty and probably doesn't have enough food to feed his or her family. So like they say, when everyone is included, everyone wins. Now, what's the skill set that's going to be relevant in the new world? The basic core values that define us today around integrity, hard work, teamwork, they will remain. But the one core value that's going to really be the condition of you being relevant and employed is going to be that of learning. We have to keep learning, and that journey should never end. Thank you very much.